All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for continuing to join us throughout the day here for the Lytham Partners 2024 Investor Select Conference. My name is Robert Blum, Managing Partner of Lytham Partners, and I'm pleased to be joined during this Fireside webcast by Brian Ostroff. Brian is the president of Arianne Phosphate, ticker symbol of DRRSF on the OTCQX. And DAN on the TSX Venture. Brian, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Thanks for making some time for me. I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent. I always enjoy our conversations. One thing I do want to remind everyone before we get started, if you have not scheduled a one-on-one meeting yet and would like to do so, send me an email. That's Blum, B-L-U-M, at lythampartners.com. If we can't make it happen today during the conference, we'll certainly look to schedule something afterwards here. So Brian, let's jump into it. Let's start sort of a high level overview on the company, remind viewers about your project.
Super, thanks. So Arianne Phosphate, we own the Lac St project in Quebec, Canada. It's a phosphate project, ideally situated close to necessary infrastructure that includes a hydroelectric dam about 30 kilometers away, which we've contracted for life of mine supply, oversized haul roads that can take us down to the river where we can access a deep sea port. So, certainly very, very well situated. The deposit itself today sits as the world's largest independently owned greenfield deposit. It has a rare geology. It's igneous as opposed to most phosphate deposits, which are sedimentary. So we'll get into this a little further, but the offshoot of that is it really does allow Arianne to make a very high purity, low contaminant phosphate concentrate. And look, the other significant takeaway here is the project, the mine is fully permitted, shovel ready, ready to go.
For listeners that maybe haven't had a chance to hear you speak in the past, when it comes to phosphate, what can you do with it? What is it used for?
Yeah, that's a great question. So of course, most people understand phosphate in terms of its ingredient in a fertilizer. But, to break it down, phosphate can generally be turned into three groups of products. So one is, again, those bulk fertilizers like MAP and DAP. And then you actually have a better layer, which is a liquid, where you can go and you can turn your phosphate concentrate into a product that would make its way into animal feeds or specialty fertilizers, like used in hydroponics and precision ag. And then, at the very top of the pyramid, there's purified phosphoric acid. And that's the product that's used in food preservatives, or if you drink your Coca-Cola, and of course also, which we'll get into a little bit, you can make into a battery grade phosphoric acid for LFP batteries. Now, one of the things that's very important, I think, for the viewers to understand is it's really the nature of your rock, of your phosphate concentrate, that will determine what you can make of those three products and in what ratios. So as you start the process, if your phosphate concentrate has contaminants like most do, being radioactive elements or heavy metals like arsenic or cadmium, your ability to basically filter up better grades and allow you to approach those other markets is challenged. So depending on your deposit, maybe 10% of your material will make it all the way through to PPA, and most will have to be used for fertilizer. Now, in the case of Arianne, because we have such a high purity concentrate, we don't have those contaminants. So we don't really have those leftovers that then need to be turned into fertilizer. So it really does allow us to target a PPA that will go for the battery grade, most of it there, with some left over for kind of that secondary animal feed specialty fertilizer market. And that's key. That really does separate Arianne from most of the guys out there.
Yeah, so I think, as you just mentioned, and it's been sort of talked about here, there's been this sort of big change for Arianne and its path forward over the last, little while here as sort of the end market applications for phosphate have expanded. It's no longer just an agricultural input, right? But, obviously applicable for batteries here as well. Let's start at a very elementary point and maybe build from it. When you look at the battery market today, what are the key inputs and where does phosphate sit in that input sort of continuum there?
Yeah, you are 100% correct in terms of as this market has developed, it's really changed things for Arianne. So, being a good Canadian, I watch hockey, and Wayne Gretzky, certainly was amongst the best, if not the best. And when asked, what made him so great, his answer was, never skated to where the puck was. I would always skate to where the puck was going to be. And in a way, that's what I see here with Arianne and what's going on. We've had this high purity phosphate, ideal for fertilizers, but as some of these other applications have come along, it's really allowed us to stand out. So, to your point, the LFP has changed things a lot. The lithium iron phosphate battery today is already over 30% of all batteries. It's a little newer to people in the West. It's been around for a longer time in Asia, but that battery is making its way here into the West, as I say, already 30%. And, beyond that, a lot of industry analysts see the LFP as being the most common of all battery chemistries by the end of the decade. And that's really a combination of its use, of course, in cars, but also its use in energy storage systems. So that's where, you put solar panels on your roof or what have you, and you're capturing that energy, and ultimately you capture it, but you have to store it for when you need it. Now, the key thing to understand with regards to these LFP batteries is that what you need, the ingredient, the actual phosphate ingredient, is purified phosphoric acid, PPA. That's that high-end material that I was just talking about. And ultimately, as this demand for the LFP continues to grow and continues to grow, what you require is more PPA. And that means you need the phosphate that can be turned into PPA. But ultimately, it's that PPA. And so that's starting to get a lot of attention. Guys like Benchmark Mineral Intelligence, a consultancy group that is widely respected in the critical minerals, put out a piece not that long ago, basically saying that the world is going to need an additional 1 million tons plus of PPA by the end of this decade just to meet the demand of LFPs. So, this is a very important material. And, so much so, a week ago, the Quebec government actually added apatite, which is the phosphate bearing mineral, onto its critical minerals list. And that, adds to other jurisdictions like the EU. So a recognition of, the LFP, the importance going forward in the greening of the economy, and maybe some of the challenges we're going to have in terms of finding enough of it.
Maybe just, and you hit on a couple of these points here, but, sort of help summarize why you believe the growth in the LFP batteries versus other lithium ion batteries there.
Yeah. So, I mean, by and large, a lot of this demand is coming for, numerous reasons. So first, the battery is safer. It doesn't suffer from thermal runaway. It doesn't burst into flames, which, is not a good thing. The batteries are better efficiencies in charging and discharging. So, you don't have to take it all the way up to 100% and run it back down to 3%. And, so it's a lot more dynamic. You get a lot more cycles out of it. So battery life is important, and a big plus. And lastly, generally you will have easier access to the materials that you need for the LFP. Look, the lithium is going to be the same regardless of where you get it from. But, nickel and especially cobalt, those can be a lot more challenging. They're a lot more expensive. They are a lot less environmentally friendly. And so the LFP really is able to benefit from all these points. And again, I think that's why it really is viewed as the battery on a go forward basis. And even beyond that, there's now discussions around the LMFP, where you add a little manganese into the mix. And with that, you are actually going to be able to get greater ranges on your car. So, that's been one of the knocks, if you will, against the LFP. Personally, I don't really buy it. I mean, at 350 kilometers today, most people live in urban settings, and look, whatever, 250 miles should last you quite a while. But, despite that, I guess some people want to feel a little bit more comfortable in regards to range, and the LMFP, as it makes its way through, will address that.
Let's sort of continue to build on this here. So let's talk. Where does the majority of the current phosphate used for these LFP batteries, and for that matter, ag, of course, where does that come from? And maybe talk about some of the variations of quality that need to be considered.
Yeah, very good. So, look, in terms of the phosphate concentrate, so that's the mined product that then gets turned into all these applications, whether they be fertilizer or food preservatives. The bulk of that comes out of the Middle East and North Africa, MENA. So that would be Morocco, by far the largest, followed by countries like Jordan and Egypt. Saudi Arabia has fairly large deposits, but they only make fertilizer. They don't actually sell the concentrate. Now, those deposits, as I was touching on earlier, they're sedimentary deposits, and they tend to have these deleterious elements mixed up in them. So, certainly it's challenging when you're making fertilizer, but even more challenging if you're looking to make PPA. Now, China is also a big producer of phosphate, and They do make quite a bit of fertilizer, and I'll come back to China in one moment. The other producer of substance, if you will, on phosphate concentrate would be Russia. So Russia, like Arianne, has igneous deposits that can make a very high purity phosphate concentrate that will work in things like PPA. But the challenge is, as we know, is Russia. So, coming back to China, which, by the way, today makes 90% of all the LFPs out there, actually over 90%. They make their PPA, their purified phosphoric acid, in a different way. They basically use a thermal process, and by not, without really getting into it, basically they take a lesser material, and they put it in a blast furnace and cook it up really hot and burn off all the impurities. So you're using a lot of coal, so not wonderful for your carbon footprint, and you're blowing arsenic, cadmium, mercury, uranium through your smokestack. Probably not the best thing for your neighbors, and ultimately, really not a process that's going to take hold in the West. So outside of China, we make purified phosphoric acid in what's called a wet process, where in essence you take that phosphate concentrate, you mix it with sulfuric acid, and that's how you make it. But again, that means you have to start with a much better phosphate concentrate to get better yields of the PPA.
Now, given let's sort of back up. Given the growth in sort of the battery market, in addition to ag, what has that done for phosphate pricing, and maybe what's your viewpoint into where we go over the next few years?
Yeah, so look, my viewpoint, I will sum up in one word: higher. Look, no different than any other commodity, as supply demand shifts, that usually results in a pretty big move in pricing. So again, there's not a whole lot of PPA out there, and when if you were to look again at benchmarks numbers, you're going to need a significant amount. Now, here's the one thing that is very interesting. In the past, PPA was really priced off of what the bulk phosphate commodities were doing, like MAP and DAP. And as MAP and DAP moved up or moved down, so too would the PPA. Obviously priced a premium to that stuff, but move up and down. What's interesting, really, in the last maybe year and a half is you've had the pricing break apart. It's not as correlated as it used to be, and we've really seen that. I think even over the last 6 to 9 months, as MAP and DAP prices have come down off of their highs, the Russian invasion, et cetera. Prices have eased back a bit, but the price of PPA has not eased back. So, the market is starting to understand these products aren't the same. They have their own supply-demand dynamics. The LFP is really driving more demand for purified phosphoric acid. So certainly I would expect that to continue and widen even further. I'll also just note one other factor in pricing and these different products. As I had said earlier, you basically have those three products: the dry bulk fertilizers, the PPA at the very top, and kind of that mid-tier, not even mid-tier, upper tier, but secondary product, which goes into things like again, the animal feeds and the specialty fertilizers. Not as sexy as batteries, granted, but certainly I think a very interesting market, because what we're seeing there is current production is shutting down. We've seen a facility in Eastern Europe shut down. There's some talk of a North American facility really coming towards the end of its life. And I can tell you in our conversations with potential partners, that's an aspect that is seriously of concern as well. So, in general, I think that the whole sector moves higher. Not straight line, of course, but I do think you're going to continue to get differentiation.
Yeah, and I, one thing I know we've got a couple of seconds here on this topic, but we've talked a lot about the battery market, right? But to the point that you just raised here, ag is still a large, important global market for phosphate. For those that maybe again haven't listened to some of our past conversations, help them understand how phosphate fits into the global ag market and its importance.
Yeah, look, it's pretty simple. No fertilizer, no food. And, it's funny that phosphate today is starting to be considered a critical mineral when, I've been arguing all along. I think the ability to feed humanity is pretty critical. So 85% of phosphate does wind up in fertilizer. It's one of the three macronutrients, potash and nitrogen being the other two. You can't substitute. It's not as if this growing demand for the LFP taking phosphate out of the market means, the farmers will just put on twice as much potash. It doesn't work that way. And so, look, I'd have argued and continue to argue that phosphate is the weak link, even when it comes to fertilizer. And that's because most of the world runs a shortage in phosphate. Here in North America, widely regarded as this major agricultural powerhouse, we have to import phosphate, and South America imports phosphate, and Western Europe imports phosphate, and a lot of areas of Asia import phosphate. So, generally the world is short. We've talked about where this stuff comes from. Certainly areas that, from time to time have been spotty in terms of security of supply. And look, we're just not self-sufficient. So now with the battery, you have another competitive force here on that phosphate. But, to be clear, without mined phosphate, you're just not going to have fertilizer, and you're just not going to be able to get the yields you need to sustain, today's population.
Yeah, I want to make sure people understood that. We've talked a lot about the markets, battery, ag, pricing, where current supplies are coming from. Let's shift our focus to Arianne, right? Given all we've sort of talked about, exactly where does Arianne fit into the equation here?
Yeah. So, as I've touched on throughout this interview, look, first and foremost, we are in a very safe, mining-friendly jurisdiction. Our deposit is extremely large, and we've already demonstrated, and we announced that a while back, conclusively, that our material can be made into PPA that's met battery companies' spec. So, we've been at this a long time. I know that there are a lot of other projects now that are starting to be pursued to meet this demand. But the fact that we've been at this for so long, we definitely have a first mover's advantage. And actually, to that point, look, that's the mine. Couple of days ago, we did announce that we've been involved in a pre-feasibility study that will allow us to build our own PPA facility. So we are looking to take advantage of our phosphate concentrate, not sell it to someone else for them to be able to address the LFP market, but to really keep that advantage to ourselves. So we are looking to vertically integrate, and of course, with that comes strategic advantages, certainly financial advantages, and as the West is looking to move away from China, to try and build their own sources and supply chains, and certainly the governments in the West have been providing incentives to do so. I mean, it would make a lot of sense for these companies to be having a conversation with us.
Right, right. Couple of minutes remaining here. The 2023 was an awful year for many of the junior miners, right? In the case of Arianne, has the market been fair as it relates to the prospects of the developments that have occurred for Arianne?
Yeah, so just as a general comment, I would say that the markets have not been fair to a lot of companies, not just Arianne, but as I'm sure a lot of your viewers, that they're involved in the small cap space, the small cap mining space, and it's been awful. Now, I definitely think it's been unfair to Arianne, because sure, you can take a look at Arianne stock through 2023 and just it has not been good. But if you were to take that, and investors make that mistake, right? The tail wags the dog. People look at the share price and make an assumption as to what the company has been up to. And it's just, if you take a look at Arianne corporately, 2023 was an excellent year. First of all, again, the growing macro, which Arianne expects to benefit from, the LFP, the understanding that phosphate too is a critical mineral. We've been able to participate in some trade missions that the Canadian government has set up for critical minerals to Europe and the United States. We announced, as I said, in 2023, our material absolutely does work for these batteries. Throughout the year, we've added a couple of very high-placed individuals to our company, Rafe Sully and Mark Edinger. Rafe was executive VP over at Nutrien, where, amongst other roles, he was the CEO of their phosphate business. Nutrien today is the world's largest producer of PPA outside of China, but for reasons we've talked about, their ability to grow is going to be a little challenged. Mark Edinger was the fellow there that was in charge of selling all of their phosphate products. So, I think their involvement with Arianne speaks volumes about where we see ourselves positioned on a go forward basis. Now, I think 2023 was an excellent year.
Excellent. I'm going to challenge you sort of in 60 seconds here. Key deliverables for 2024 and any sort of final comments before we end the discussion here.
Yeah, so 2024 is already off to a great start. As mentioned, Quebec has announced phosphate onto its critical minerals list. Our pre-feasibility, just to be clear, with that, we expect Arianne to be in a position to be the single largest provider of PPA outside of China. What's important for us, for our shareholders, for our stakeholders, is to bring in a partner. These are big dollars, big capex, big financial returns, but this is something that ideally Arianne would like to partner with, and us doing that will unlock a lot of value. So really just I guess in closing here, and since this is an investor conference, let's just talk very briefly about the valuation. Arianne, as mentioned, has been at it a long time, 12 plus years. Company has spent $100 million to get to what is today arguably the best, safest phosphate deposit. Our market cap today is under $80 million. And I think that as more and more people start to understand that phosphate too is a critical mineral, just like lithium, graphite, cobalt, nickel, so too should come a re-rating. But unlike a lot of the commodities I've just mentioned, there's just not a lot of phosphate, situations out there where an investor can be immediately involved. And so just in closing, I know it sounds ridiculous, small company, but we really are well positioned to take advantage and become one of the dominant players in PPA and ultimately the LFP battery.
Fantastic. Well, Brian, we'll leave it there. I always enjoy our conversations, find them very informative. I hope the audience does here as well. Two quick reminders. One, if you have not scheduled your one-on-one meeting with Brian here and would like to do so, shoot me an email, Blum, BLUM at lythampartners.com. And again, we have additional webcasts coming up throughout the day. Visit the website, click on the presentations tab to learn more. So, Brian, thank you once again. Greatly appreciate your time today. Hope you enjoy the conference.
Thank you.